Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to give you all a warm welcome to this meeting of the Standards Committee. I thought we might just start by introducing ourselves, because we are quite a large committee, and some of us are members and some are officers, and we also have independent persons and parish representatives. So I'm Diana van der Kloot, and I'm going to chair the committee. And on my left,
I'm Liz Fenwick, Democratic Services Officer. Good morning.
Morning, Lauren from Legal Services, lawyer and Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Steve Watkins, Parish Council Rep.
David Skip, District Councillor for Forest Ward.
Belinda Walters, District Councillor for Den Ward.
Richard Winch, Feedback Officer.
Robert Baxendale, Legal Services Business Manager and Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Mike Rumble, independent person.
Bill Baxter, Parish Council Representative.
Peter Burgess, a District Councillor and apparently Vice Chairman.
Kate Rowbottom, Councillor for Billingshurst.
Joan Gregg, Councillor for Storrington and Washington.
John Donaldson, independent person.
And Sharon Evans, the Head of Legal and Democratic Services and the Council's Monitoring Officer.
thank you. I'm also welcoming to the meeting anyone that's watching live on the internet. This is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and it is being recorded. And we have one member of in the audience here present, who will be coming to speak, I think, later to us, Councillor Bevis. Thank you. Before we proceed, I have to remind you where the fire exits are in an emergency. So we have one over in that direction and one behind us here. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off or on mute. Just to remind you that this meeting is held in public, but it's not a public meeting. So only members and co-opted members have a right to speak. And so that's everyone that introduced themselves. Good morning. Around the table, and we also have officers to speak as well. I'd also like to remind you that the committee is charged under the Constitution with discharging the matters set out in the Localism Act of 2011, Chapter 7, and any regulations made under them, which is to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members. We did have a previous meeting which was due to take place on the 14th of September, and an agenda was actually issued for that meeting. But that was cancelled in respect for the late Queen Elizabeth, who died on the 8th of September, so barely a week before that meeting. So we have missed one of our scheduled meetings, but the items on that agenda have been carried forward onto the agenda for this meeting. So I'm now going to move to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I can't believe we've got any.
So we haven't received any apologies for absence this morning.
Thank you. So the next item is agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, and the previous meeting was the 15th of June 2022. I did have one suggested amendment, which was my own suggested amendment, which was on page 4 of our bundle. It's item SC6, and it was the second paragraph. It was really a concern about how this was the grammatical construction of the sentence. The word who seems to refer back to the family. So members also sent their sincere condolences to Mary Burroughs' family from Slinfold Parish Council had recently passed away, and I thought that was a little bit misleading, and it should perhaps be amended to say members also sent their sincere condolences to the family of Mary Burrows. And I thought we'd say senior clerk from Slinfold Parish Council, who had recently passed away. So
just to advise
yes.
you that after your suggestion that the minutes have been updated and those signing today will show the correct wording as requested.
yeah, so if anybody who was here at the last meeting is happy with that amendment, I will sign that. Shall I sign it at the end of the meeting?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, okay. Fine, thank you. So we now come on to item 3, which is declaration of members' interests. Does anyone have an interest to declare? So, no. And so moving on to agenda item 4, which is announcements. And this is to receive any announcements from the chairman of the committee, the chief executive, or the monitoring officer. I do have one announcement to make, and this is an item of news which I've only just received, and it's rather sad, I think, and that is that our long-standing monitoring officer, this is her last meeting of the Standards Committee, and she is leaving us at the end of December to move on to pastures new. So I would like, to thank Sharon very much for her fantastic work she's done as monitoring officer and servicing this committee, and her wonderful advice and wisdom and hard work. And we'll be very sorry to not have you going forward, but we wish you all the best for the future. Apart from that, I have no further announcements to make. So we then come to agenda item 5, which is the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Annual Review. And we are asked here to consider the report of the Head of Customer and Digital Services. Before I ask the officer to present the report, I just wanted to perhaps emphasize, make a couple of points about it. And that is that complaints to the council normally fall into one of two types. So we have complaints about the standard of services or action that has been taken by the council, or lack of action that's been taken, a failure of action by the council, by members of its staff or its contractors. So that's one type of complaint. And the other type of complaint that we have are breaches of the allegations of breaches of code of conduct by a district or a parish councillor, in that they failed to comply with the standards required by the code of conduct of members and councillors. And it's those latter complaints that come to this committee, or can come to this committee, to be adjudicated on, not the former. We don't deal with that former type of complaint. And there are indeed separate procedures for dealing with those two types of complaint. But in either case, if the complainant isn't satisfied with the outcome, how it's been decided, he can refer the matter to the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. And as I understand it from my reading of the report that we have been given in our papers, that report deals with both types of complaint, which have been referred to the Ombudsman in 2021-22. And I'm going to ask our feedback officer to present the report. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you stated that the Ombudsman send out an annual review letter detailing the outcomes of all the complaints they've received. It goes to you as the chair and to the chief exec. So this year we had a total of 18 complaints made about us to the Ombudsman. You'll see from the papers that is a significant increase on the 8 we received in 2021. But that is largely due to the fact that the Ombudsman ceased investigating for a period of about 4 months in 2020. So the figures we had in 2021 are a lot lower than they have been in previous years. So looking at those 18 complaints, we had 2 which were upheld, 2 which were not upheld, 11 complaints were closed without a full investigation, and 3 complaints were referred back to us for local resolution. Now, those 3 that were referred back to us, that's when the complaint's gone direct to the Ombudsman rather than coming and complaining to us first. So those 3 could then have ended up in the other numbers above. But if you've got any objections, Shao, I was just going to jump straight to the upheld complaints, because obviously we don't really learn too much about the complaints which haven't been upheld. So the 2 upheld complaints are set out in paragraph 3.8. I'll go through the first one was a Revs and Bens complaint. Now that covered a number of different issues in that complaint, but the main crux of the complaint was about the refusal of a business grant under the COVID scheme. We refused to grant it because it didn't comply with the guidance issued by government. So that the business complained about that, and an element of that complaint was also the fact that whilst that complaint was ongoing, we'd agreed to put a pause on business rates, and a reminder notice was sent out in error because the system had automatically generated it. So the only part of that complaint that was upheld by the Ombudsman was the fact that we'd sent out that reminder notice. And we did, of course, acknowledge that and apologise for that in our own complaints procedure. And the Ombudsman was happy with that and didn't recommend any further action. The second complaint was a housing complaint. This one was quite a complex and complicated complaint, and you'll see there from the details in the report that the complainant alleged to the Ombudsman that he had inadequate water supply in his flat, and therefore his accommodation wasn't suitable. The details of the actual complaint were that there was a lack of water flow to one tap in the kitchen sink, but the water flow in the rest of the flat, the bath, the washing machine, the other sinks was fine. But the Ombudsman held that because the doctor had sent us a letter saying that lack of water would have impacted the resident, we should have at that stage then reviewed the accommodation, which we didn't do. So the head of housing accepted that from the Ombudsman, accepted his findings. We retrained all our housing staff, and that was carried out within 3 months of the decision. We also made an offer of compensation and paid compensation of £500 to the complainant. So although it does seem on the reading of the bare facts of how the complaint was phrased, that it could have been quite a more drastic complaint. While there was a failing, it may not have been quite as severe as it first appears. So they're the only 2 upheld complaints, which is not a bad record. If you look at paragraph 3.10, you'll see that overall the complaints that went to full investigation to the Ombudsman, 66% were upheld. So out of the number of complaints that we had go to the Ombudsman, only having 2 upheld isn't particularly bad. Chair, if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, I think it is encouraging that it was only 2 out of the 18 cases that went to the Ombudsman that were upheld. And I certainly did focus when I was reading the report on the case, the second case that was upheld, which was the housing case. As I say, these are not cases that have come before this committee, so all I know about it is what is in the report from the Ombudsman here. You've outlined that the facts of the case were that the allegation by the resident was that the temporary accommodation was unsuitable because of an inadequate supply of water, And because of his medical condition, the lack of water caused him severe difficulties. And he complained that the council had failed to act when it became aware that the accommodation was unsuitable because of the inadequate water supply. The Ombudsman found that the council was at fault and for failing to respond appropriately, and made recommendations, including refresher training on the importance of keeping the suitability of accommodation under review when a change of circumstances is reported. And as you've said, Richard, we're told that the staff training has been carried out, and I'm sure lessons will have been learned by this council to carry forward from that case. And I'm sure that members of the committee, like me, on reading that case, will have called to mind the recently widely reported coroner's inquest on the death of little Awab Ishak, who died as a result of prolonged exposure to mold, which was in his parents' flat. And his father had complained about that to the landlord, which was a housing association, over a number of years to no avail. And in the words of the coroner, in that case, the case should be a defining moment for the housing sector. And I don't want to overemphasize the parallels between the Ishak case and the Horsham case, but lessons should be learned from such cases, as the implications can be serious. Does anyone have any other comments that they want to make, or any comments they'd like to make about the report, or any questions they'd like to ask? I have received a request from Councillor Bevin, who is not a member of this committee, to address the committee on this agenda item, and I think on that particular matter. And I have agreed that he can address the committee. So, Councillor Bevis, if you'd like to speak to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll come over here so I can speak through the speaker system. I did meet the complainant at the Citizens' Advice very early on in this process, and then his case was handed over to one of my colleagues who took it through. I'm not going to use information that I got at the CAB. I'm just going to look at information that was in the Ombudsman's report. And I think it's a fairly sorry state of affairs that the complainant was put in temporary accommodation in September. He did have a serious medical condition. He complained about the water pressure in October. Apparently other tenants had complained from August about the water pressure. There was a visit by an operative who noted there was such poor water flow that the boiler didn't recognise the hot tap was on. So, you know, it was really, really low pressure. But then a contractor explained to the tenants this was because flow restrictors were installed because of building regulations. I can't find any building regulation that requires that, but that's not part of the complaint. And the contractor considered no further action was required. So at that point, the complainant was left with very poor water pressure, unable to use water for what he needed medically. And the contractor thought, well, that was it. Then later on in the report, it says the customer lives in a flat. All other properties have no issues with their water pressure. Well, again, that clearly people have been complaining from August onwards. The main fed tap runs very slowly and completely stops when another appliance is used. And these are small flats, so you know they're not using huge number of appliances, maybe a washing machine and running a tap at the same time. And this was when the internal stopcock was fully opened and the customer advises that the restrictor has been installed in this new build. And then we go to the 18th of December. So this complainant was waiting from September to December And it was confirmed again that there was very little flow. And the technician was unable to remove the water restrictor to Mr. X's flat, as it was found that the restrictor was installed in the whole building and not one individual flat. And water would need to be isolated to the whole building. So even though this was a HDC managed property, we didn't seem to understand what was in the property and how to manage it. So again, it's a worrying state of affairs. And then the Ombudsman says, on inquiry to the council, I noted at this stage 3 visits have been arranged to Mr. X's flat to resolve the situation. On the first visit, Mr. X had asked for more than 1 hour's notice, not unreasonably. In the second and third visits, Mr. X did allow engineers to enter his flat. And then the council had said that Mr. X was unwilling, and the Ombudsman asked the council how this was perceived to be willing to allow access. So even in February, the contractor still hadn't managed to fit this situation. 8th of February, Mr. X complained that he'd waited all day. Now, this, I think it shows very little customer-centric thinking. We've got to, if you turn left out of the lifts and go into the planning area, up on the wall it says, customers are central to everything we do. Well, this customer was just getting explanations about why he had a problem. He wasn't getting anything really done to overcome that problem. And I think that's not the way we should be operating. And in the council response to the Ombudsman, we asserted that no other complaints had been made, but the Ombudsman later received evidence that other complaints had been made. And I don't like this, that we're telling the Ombudsman one thing, when clearly we've got evidence contrary to that, and yet we're not being open and honest about what we know. And the Ombudsman then finds things that we already knew. It looks a bit underhand, I think. There was another instance where the council said to the Ombudsman that they hadn't been able to get information about the complainant's medical condition. And yet the Ombudsman had evidence that very early on in this process, the complainant had given the council all the evidence it needed. And had that been looked at properly, they would have understood why the complainant was really very upset about things. So there's 2 things really coming from this. First of all, and I think this is quite key to what we're doing in the future. We're faced with the problem of water neutrality. We're faced with the problem of putting restricting devices into homes. I think there are things in here we could learn from, and we really ought to understand the problems that this block of flats had because of water restrictors, and going forward understand how we can best manage those sorts of things. But the other thing is, what have the council learned from this complaint? How has it been embedded? How are we making ourselves more customer centric? Because, okay, we've done some training at the Ombudsman's insistence on making sure that properties are suitable. But there's a whole load of other learnings in here, learnings about how we interact with the Ombudsman and give him the correct information first time. There's a whole host of other things about how we make our customers, and whether that's a tenant, whether it's a council taxpayer, whatever it is, we say that we are a customer-centric organisation. Let's walk that walk properly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bevis, for coming to address this committee on this matter. I'm not quite sure what you would like, whether you are asking this committee to do anything, but it obviously has been considered in great detail by the Ombudsman, and he has adjudicated on it and found against the council, and the council has taken the action that's been recommended. It's not really part of the jurisdiction of this committee to consider these types of complaint. So is there anything further that you're expecting this committee to do, Councillor Feathers?
No, I'm not trying to reopen the complaint at all, and I think the Ombudsman dealt with that satisfactorily, but there are potential learnings in the Ombudsman report which I haven't heard mentioned in this committee, and I think that particular report from the Ombudsman should be taken back, looked at in more detail, and see whether there are other things that we ought to be doing that are more than hinted at. I mean, for instance, we ought to have a process that says, when you're applying to the Ombudsman, make sure you get everything right first time. It's not rocket science, that one. But when it comes to dealing with customers, rather than explaining why they're suffering from problems, why don't we try and understand what problems people are facing and fix them? I mean, they're not interested in the fact that we've installed a water restrictor. They're interested in the fact that the flow of water in their tap is so poor that they can't do things for their own hygiene that they need to do. And that, I think, is a poor show.
Thank you, Councillor Bevis. I think I make 2 points in response to what you've said. And I think the first point is that I don't think there's really much that this committee can do to take this forward. And if you have any questions about what lessons have been learned by the council or how they might improve dealing with the Ombudsman, that the best person to take that to would be the head of service, the director here. Who's the head of service?
It would be the head of paid service, the chief executive, Jane Eaton, that you would need to address.
Yeah.
Any further concern.
Okay. And I think the other point is that I do appreciate that these cases can be very serious, and I did make that point when I introduced the report, and I mentioned the very serious case that was a high-profile case that was in the paper of the little Ishak child, and I note that as a result of that, Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, has written to every council leader in England and social housing provider to say that they must raise the bar dramatically on the quality of social housing and empower tenants to ensure their voices are truly heard. So those are his words, and that is his direction. And we will have received, we will have received a letter to that effect. I think Councillor Utam would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very sorry to hear the doubts that Councillor Bevis has. I would suggest that possibly you should actually speak to Mark Rankin, who is the head of environmental services, and also Rob Jarvis, if you speak to them directly, because what you're saying is actually quite serious, because I'm the chairman of Housing and Public Protection, and I can assure you that they are absolutely intent on doing the best for their residents, both teams and both heads of service. And I really think that it would be beneficial to you to understand more about how they operate. I really do. Thank you.
Yes, and I would perhaps add that I don't think it is really appropriate to come to a committee and use this forum to accuse others of being underhand. It is really a matter that should be addressed to the head of service. Yes.
Just respond to that last point. I mean, we've had one change of head of service, we've had one change of CEO. So any accusations of underhandness, unfortunately, is outside of this council now. But you know, it's in the report. People have made assertions that have been demonstrated to be untrue. I can't help that. You know, it wasn't me that did it. It was them. I'm sorry, but I'm as far as taking this forward. Yes, I'm more than happy to speak to the officers and possibly Councillor Utan. I have had correspondence with them before, but I thought as this was the public forum in which the Ombudsman report was discussed, that it should be put in the public forum as well. You know, we need to learn from things. We shouldn't be just saying, oh, it's a nice report from the Ombudsman. Yeah, we got one thing wrong and moving on. We should be drilling down into this and trying to genuinely learn and genuinely improve our services. So, but I'm quite happy to take it forward as you suggest.
Thank you, Councillor Bevis. Yes, I agree that lessons do need to be learned, and I'm sure they are being and have been learned. So I'd like to thank you for coming along and addressing the committee. I'm now going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 6. Which is the Steyning Parish Council review, support and recommendations. And we are asked here to consider the report of the Head of Legal and Democratic Services and Monitoring Officer.
Excuse me, just click.
Yes, I thought before I hand over to Monitoring Officer, I'd just say just a word of introduction about this, because I know we've got some new members of the committee, and perhaps independent persons and parish representatives. So, and people listening may not be fully aware of the background. So, for a number of years, complaints relating to Steyning Parish Council, mainly councillor against councillor, I say mainly, not purely that, have been taking an ever increasing amount of time of this council's monitoring officer and the legal and democratic services. In fact, 70% of the complaints to Horsham District Council in the last 3 years related to Steyning Parish Council. And it's estimated that they've taken up 80% of the time of the department. And the cost was estimated to be £65,000 per year. This was considered by this committee to be disproportionate, given that Steyning is just one of 35 parish and neighbourhood councils in the district. And it was also considered to be an unacceptable drain on public money. So under the complaints procedure for this, for Horsham District Council, this committee can resort to any appropriate action to resolve a complaint. That's under paragraph 5.1, little 8 and little 9. So this committee decided at its meeting on the 16th of March, following contact between the monitoring officer and Steyning Parish Council to make sure that they were behind it, to instruct Hoey Anscoff Associates Limited to work with Steyning Parish Council to try to improve matters by conducting a review into the internal disputes and infighting. Hoey Anscoff have considerable expertise in advising on standards in public life. This committee also resolved at our March meeting that no further action would be taken on the outstanding complaints pending this alternative resolution. And also on this committee's recommendation, the council subsequently approved a budget of £20,000 to meet the cost of the review. We've now received the report of Harry Anscough, and it has been circulated with our papers for this meeting. And I should like to invite the monitoring officer to present it to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've already heard, and as this committee is aware, this class as possibly radical action in the standards kind of complaints procedure to get somebody into a parish council and do a complete review. We've now done that, as the chairman has said, and the report is attached within our agenda, the reports pack, and the detail is there. The report, as you would have seen, and as I would have detailed before we actually went ahead and instructed them, it looked at behaviour, the roles and responsibilities. It looked into the detail of their policies and their procedures. It went along to some of their meetings, as I have done so, and so has one of my deputies, Robert. We've been along to their meetings too. It looked at their ambition and their strategy. And then it looked at monitoring of a plan and looking at a way forward. And so that detail is, as I've said already, in this agenda pack. Stemming from the report, there were 36, quite a lot, 36 recommendations that were made. And those recommendations and the report in totality was presented to the parish council a couple of months ago. And again, myself and Robert Baxendale, one of my deputy monitoring officers, we were there with them as the report was presented to them. And again, there were most councillors were present, and it was accepted, and it was a positive meeting that stemmed from that. Upon receipt of the report, obviously they were presented the report, they were given the report, they were able to look at the recommendations, but they felt that they needed a full member kind of working party, and they needed some help on how they would kind of take on board the contents of the report, but also work towards the implementation of those recommendations going forward. So again, I know Stenning quite well. I attended with Robert. We both went and we discussed a way forward. I ended up chairing the meeting. It was positive, surprisingly positive, and we walked away feeling quite satisfied with the report as it was written and with the report and how it was received. Since then, Steyning Parish Council have had a meeting that was on the 21st of November, where they passed a resolution. They resolved to duly note the report. They'd already had a look at it in detail, but this was a resolution that was voted for. They duly noted the report, and they resolved to take the actions and to implement those recommendations. And again, that's in our report here. And they also agreed and resolved to report on the progress. This is the really important bit, to report on the progress within a 6-month period, and then to report back to us in 12 months. So that was agreed. We also have been told that Steyning Parish Council at the same meeting, they resolved and agreed to take this, the civility and respect pledge, which forms part of one of the recommendations. We were told at the time, this is something new to me, and it was on the receipt of the report that I found out about it, but we know that the National Associations of Local Councils is putting forward this civility pledge and asking councils, the local councils, parish councils, to agree to it, and apparently that's happening. I think we heard that 400 have taken up the pledge already, and we were really, really pleased that Steyning Parish Council were prepared to do that. And as I've said, that is something that they have done. So we've got the report in front of us. The chairman has already said, we talked about how much this council, and I think this is, we estimated a spend, and I think this was an annual spend. I don't think this was in totality of £65,000. We talked about £20,000 and you gave me permission, you agreed, this committee agreed for me to have a budget of £20,000. We haven't spent that budget. The budget to date, the amount that we have paid to date is, I think I've got the exact figure, is £13,680. And we have the news for this committee that Steyning Parish Council have an implementation plan, are following their implementation plan, and will be reporting back in 6 months and 12 months' time. So with regard to the report, I have positive news that I bring this committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'd like to hear, what your views are of the report. I will give my views to begin with. I did find the report to be clear, constructive, and full of wise advice. I did note that the focus of the report was not to try to adjudicate on matters, issues, and grievances that arose in the past, but to try to work with Steyning Parish Council to find a way for them to work more harmoniously and effectively in the future. And that's the expertise of Howie Anscough. It's to support councils where there have been difficulties in working relations, where there have been a large number of standards complaints, and where there's been a breakdown in governance. And they've identified that the key problem with Steyning Parish Council is that behaviour has fallen below expected standards, and there's a need to restore a culture of respect and tolerance. And respect and tolerance are the linchpins of a civilised democratic society, and they should underpin the working relationship between councillors and their clerk and their staff at all times, even where there are personal and political differences. It really isn't acceptable not to treat others with respect, even though you might not agree with them. And where respect and tolerance are missing, I mean, this is me speaking now, I'm not quoting from the report, this is just what I think. The atmosphere inevitably becomes toxic with aggression and bickering and bullying, and also extensive nitpicking, which is designed to wear down the person to whom it's addressed and to undermine them. Sort of long emails of criticism. So Howie Anscough have come up with a wealth of wise recommendations, in my mind. And I don't think one can expect a change overnight. I think it's very difficult to change a culture. It's a bit like launching a rocket. You need an enormous amount of power to get things moving. But I think it's up to every councillor to make a start on this and to show leadership in showing that they are going to comply with this, to put these recommendations, to treat others with respect, and not to expect it just to be done by others, but it's got to be done by everybody. Because otherwise you get into a spiral downwards into this toxic atmosphere. It's very easy to say, well, they're not treating me, they're being rude to me, so I'm going to be rude back. And I don't think that's going to be constructive. There's got to be a start, and it will be difficult. But I think once the ball starts rolling and leadership is shown in showing respect and tolerance, then I think things will increase, and I have every faith that it will. I think Steyning Parish Council have achieved and are achieving good things for their community, and I think it would be a pity for the council not to realise its full potential in what remains of the current session, and to be able to carry out their vision. So I think other members of the committee would like to speak. So we've got Peter, Councillor Burgess, I should say first, and then Councillor Rowbottom. Thank you.
I've been through this as the chairman of another parish council where 3 or 4 councillors ganged up and continually bombarded the clerks and myself and my deputy chairman. So much so that it became overwhelming. Meetings became bad-tempered. But the really sad thing was that good councillors who were very helpful left because they just were not going to put up with it at every single meeting. The solution was that I stood down. We elected a new chairman, the dream team, they said. They made a complete hash of it. And the only way was that the 3 members concerned left. And I'm happy to say that though I'm on the same council, still not as the chairman, I might add, that we have a very good, effective working parish council. So one of the things about this is, I understand we've had letters since. Have we had complaint letters since? The chairman has. That we must see whether this does work. But having looked through the things last time we looked at this, I am really very doubtful, despite the hard work that the consultants and our monitoring officer have done. It is toxic, and I'll go around and shoot a few people if you'd like to, but it's really debilitating. And I'm really surprised the clerk is still there because our clerks left. Luckily, we got some good ones in their place. So I think we need to monitor it very carefully and make sure that those good councillors, which I'm sure there are quite a lot out in that part of the world, stay in and help out. And one of the things that I found was wrong, everybody agreed that these people were disruptive, but would not speak out in council for fear that they themselves may be, what's the right word, hammered. So we need to look at this aspect as well. I think I saw a pink elephant flying past, and I'm sure that everything will be absolutely superb and the Steyning Council will be fine. But I'm really awfully sorry, I don't think it will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burgess. Yes, I think what you're pointing out really is that this isn't a problem that's unique to Steyning. It happens at other councils as well. And you know, I have perhaps a little bit more faith than you have that things will improve. And I think, as you say, it is very important that good councillors, when you say good councillors, I mean, you know, ones that do comply with the standards and treat people with respect and understand that, of course, we all have differences of opinion. But you know, you can't be rude to people, and you have to allow them to, you know, make their points and not be undermined.
Yes, well, I don't know whether it's as chairman I've received a letter this week. I don't know whether anybody else has received it, accusing us of spending wasting £20,000 on that report. And this is an ex-councillor chairman, this and that and the other. But he's getting very vitriolic about it all and how we've wasted £20,000 on this report.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Yes, indeed, I think we've all on this committee been copied into emails from various people associated with Steyning Parish Council, and I think the monitor officer has actually put the fact on the table just now that we actually haven't spent 20,000. We've actually spent £13,680, so that is incorrect. that allegation. And I'd also like to say that the reason, we went down this route as a committee was because of the amount of public money that we were spending on dealing with Steyning Parish Council complaints. It was getting completely disproportionate, £65,000 per year. And that has been going on for 3 years. 10 years, I'm told by the monitoring officer. And that is not really acceptable. It's not a way to spend our hard-earned residents' money. Yes, Councillor Uton.
Just very quickly, sorry. I had a similar, well understood by Sharon, a problem with my parish council, and it was suggested that they have their meetings recorded. They flatly refused to, but the threat of it seemed to really sort them out. So I'm just wondering, has anything changed, and can it be enforced that their meetings are recorded?
Thank you, Chair. There is nothing in legislation that will compel, unfortunately, a parish council to record their meetings. It is always helpful, and I think particularly after the pandemic, the majority of parish councils do that. But again, when it comes, I'm being quite selfish, when it comes to actually adjudicating and assessing complaints, if the meeting's recorded, it makes life a lot easier for us. But as you say, if these meetings are being live streamed or can be found on websites, and stay there for the public to go back and look at, people may consider how they behave, and you might see, well, you would hope to see better behaviour if that does happen. But no, there is certainly nothing within the law at this moment in time, unfortunately. Chairman, am I able to continue? I just wanted to kind of pick up on the report and some of those recommendations that came from Hoey and Ainscough. One of the things that they looked at, and we're all already questioning whether the report is going to make any difference whatsoever. So I'm trying to be optimistic here, and I will make it very clear to this committee that Steyning Parish Council is not the reason I'm leaving Horsham District Council. They didn't get the better of me. But I think it's really important to look at what the report brings to the council and how it was received. So the report, when Hoey went along, Paul Hoey and Natalie went along to deliver the report, and it is quite damning. It talks about unreasonable behaviour, bad conduct. It's, this is why we called them in. They had to face that, and they had to listen to that coming from external independent, people and experts in the field. And all of those councillors that were present, they took that on board. They didn't want to be seen as this, I don't believe this is the right word, but it's a word that's been used by many of the councillors and many members of the public, that it's dysfunctional. They don't want to be seen like that. There is true drive and feeling for things to improve. And they do want to move, they do truly want to move forward. One of the things that the report looked at and made it perfectly clear, and in all of the conversations they had with the members that took part and participated in this, is that we are not going to look back. We don't want to look back. What's happened in the past has happened, and we now need to look forward. And so these recommendations were put together with kind of coping mechanisms and ways of moving forward and ways of dealing with behaviour that should help and should assist. One of the things that they did bring out and they did find when they went and looked at Steyning was that they had a lot in place. They had a lot of good things. They had a lot of good policies. They were trying to work together as best as they could in those difficult circumstances. And what they're hoping to achieve, if these recommendations are implemented, what they will hope to achieve and hopefully be able to do is work together, deal with those. And there are conflicting personalities. I don't want to use the word difficult personalities, but there are interesting personalities within that council, and they don't see eye to eye. I don't want to say ever, but very often. But what the report has tried to do is find a way of them working together, and also, again, talking about officers and the clerks, as Councillor Burgess has talked about, protect those clerks and make their work easier and make the dealings of the situation easier. So that's what we hope will come from this. We know, Robert and I that have been and sat in their meetings, we know that there is true, well, I'm hoping this is still the case. We have seen emails flying around, but we know that there are attitudes that and you know, work that needs to be done and work that they want to do, and we know that they want to improve and they want to try and work as best they can together. It isn't going to be easy, and I think they know that. But I think again, we've just announced the committee that I will be leaving in December. But I think what we have to do as the committee and as the monitoring officer going forward, and the deputies and officers, is that we have to stay close to this. We have to find out how they're doing. We need to hear progress, and we need to look and expect that progress. And if we're not getting it, then we need to be firm. And we need to know, and we need to tell them what those expectations are. So this idea of wasting this money and wasting our time, because I've seen emails that are saying that out there, and I know their heads are nodding because councillors here in this room have seen emails that are suggesting that. That is not the case. These recommendations have been put forward, and it's serious. This is serious. And if this implementation plan and these recommendations are not followed through, then the report does talk about it. I don't know if it talks about it strongly enough. Then there is a chance that a community governance review will take place, and will be asking members of the public, and will be asking, you know, this district council, what does that parish council have to offer here? And those are questions that will need to be asked. So I'm hoping that I've taken this whole process incredibly seriously. I'm hoping that the parish council takes it seriously too. We as a committee have done, and we gave a budget to this parish council, and it was a budget of £20,000. We haven't spent all of that. And I'm hoping to get some value for money, that's for sure. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sharon. Stephen, parish representative, would you like to say a word?
Yes, as a parish council representative, I have had the privilege of looking at a number of complaints from Steyning Parish Council, and I was quite astounded by the depth of and long-standing grievances that were clearly simmering, and the behaviour that I actually witnessed on a video recording as well. So they didn't seem too put out by the fact they were being recorded. The behaviour was disgusting. If the public viewed that or read any of the reports, and if parishioners from Steyning saw it, they would be aghast, I think. I think the report is excellent, and the recommendations are very good. I suspect it will have some immediate impact, but my concern is that given the evidence that we've seen over the years of the breakdown in relationships between certain parish councillors on Steyning Parish Council, I just have some concerns that it will get a bit lost as time goes by, and we might be faced with going back to the scenario that we've had for a number of years now. I hope it doesn't. I mean, I don't know if any standing parish councillors have resigned as a result of this report. I haven't seen that any have, which well, that's what it is. I was going to ask, you know, what our plan B might be, but the monitoring officer has kind of covered that, because I do think we need to keep a very close eye on how things progress, because I think initially, as I say, things might appear fine, but in the mid to longer term, I think we do need to. I have some concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Chairman, as independent person,
Yes,
I've
Michael.
obviously looked at an awful lot of standing complaints over the last year, 18 months. So I've got a sort of fairly good understanding of where people are coming from. The report was fairly emphatic in its recommendations, and there are hints, sort of fairly large hints about, well, if people can't, you know, play the game, then they should consider resignation. And then, you know, we also need to look at disillusion as well as a final, action. Having said that, it all really comes down to the lack of enforcement, if you like, the lack of sanctions. It's obviously far easier to get rid of a prime minister than it is a parish councillor. It does seem to be the one position in local government where people are, I won't say bulletproof, but they are very good at deflecting those bullets and avoiding them. So whether it is worth, as a council, using this, if you like, as perhaps an example to have another crack at the new government to sort of say, well, you know, lots of things have been recommended over the past few years, but they haven't got anywhere. And it's all come back to, well, it's coming back to the monitoring officer, it's coming back to the local authority. Again, it's down to that lack of sanction, and whether we can in some way just revisit that, make a recommendation again, take it up with the members of parliament, etc., to see whether we can actually maybe get some movement from the new government as to whether we can actually put in some effective sanctions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, you remind us that the government hasn't taken up the recommendation that there should be a power to suspend councillors for 6 months, which might, have been of some effect in dealing with this type.
One good example in my previous career was trying for years to get the government to implement fixed penalty tickets for breaches of bylaws. And again, that was another one. There were lots of papers written on it by think tanks and everybody else, and everybody agreed it was a good idea, but still that hasn't happened. So things like the park bylaws, which, you know, would be very amenable to issue of a fixed penalty ticket, can't be done because the legislation is actually on the statute book, but it just hasn't been passed because it hasn't seemed important enough.
Yes.
John Donaldson. Yes. I support what has been said here in the report, but two things I would like to ask, or three things. One is that we do need a timeline as to where we started this 6 and 12 month from, and obviously, as you, Sharon, rightly said, regular reports back as to what progress is, so that we can advance and adjust it accordingly. But the second and third point is, I've spoken before about vexatious complaints and a policy, and it mentions in recommendation 13 about this. Would it not be a good idea for us to consider across the council to have one policy that applies across that? And the second one is, it talks about the Nalcon SLCC civility and respect pledge, as it were. Likewise, should that not apply to all councillors? And if they're signing up to a pledge on that, when it comes to the ballot box and they become councillors, or any time they become councillors, they're signing up to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any comments you wanted to make about that?
Thank you, Chairman. We do have, with regard to vexatious, I get involved kind of as the, I don't know, last chance saloon maybe, with our complaints process, and that's the as our chair was talking at the very beginning of this meeting, we have the complaints process, stage 1 and stage 2, that we follow for all other complaints, and then we obviously have our standards complaints that we are responsible for here at this committee. We do have within the external or the council's complaint process, we do have something that we call vexatious, and that's when I'm called upon to write to members of the public, residents that have crossed that threshold where we say enough is enough, and we, you know, it's officer time, it's the same matter, it's the same complaint, you've exhausted all avenues. So we certainly have that, and we certainly use that. We do also have that within our complaints process. So when we did the review back in, trying to remember when we did it last 2021. And we worked incredibly hard to streamline as best as we could, but also to make the assessing of complaints so much easier. We do have that. So we allow for vexatious. If we see the same kind of persistent questioning, that the same type of complaint that's coming through, you know, we've already dealt with, then we are able to use that, John. So we can turn on that for sure. Yes.
Skip.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I read the report and found it encouraging, and I have to be optimistic that respect and tolerance might prevail. Sadly, I think in national life, we don't have great examples of respect and tolerance, and I can't see how perhaps people at that, or public at this level, can take heart from that. I do consider several things. One is the clerk's role seems to be fundamental. And as Councillor Burgess has said, sometimes it's impossible for a clerk to continue with the pressure they're under. I do think that the clerk obviously is going to get the support that the clerk needs. But it's important, again, I note that the chairman of the parish council and the deputy chairman relate very closely with the clerk in work that is continuing down there. And I would ask that we ensure that there's much support and training for the clerk is given as possible. I am just concerned about the on page 42 of the report. It's the conclusion, and it talks about the community governance review, including the option to dissolve Steyning Parish Council. Now, this seems to me perhaps the most major part of the review, that little phrase, to dissolve Steyning Parish Council. It's not something I think that we considered, because we were waiting for a report from the government about their some of their plans in the future. Obviously, government aren't going to change those, but I would like to know a little bit more about this community governance review. Who initiates it? I guess it's the district council, but I'm not sure. And how soon one could initiate it, should in the 6 months or 12 months the situation not have resolved. So I'm a little bit, that seems to be our final option, and I'd like to know a little bit more about it. But I do hope that civility and respect will actually prevail at Steyning. I think probably most of us have a slight reservation about that.
Thank you, Councillor Skip. Yes, the community governance review, I think, is something that's not very familiar to many of us. And I will ask the monitoring officer just to explain a little bit more about that. But I would emphasise it's very much very much a step of last resort, and I have, as I've said, have every faith that we can get to that stage. But I will ask Sharon to say a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My belief and my understanding is that it is something that we do here as a district. We can be petitioned to do it also, but it is something that we would have a look into. And what my understanding is, I've done one in the past, haven't done one recently, is that you have been involved in one in the past. What you do is you ask that parish, members of the public, you fully consult, and so you ask what true value do you believe that the parish council is bringing to you, and are they able to get the business done? Are they operating? Now, throughout the report, there were some positive messages in fact, and very much so. And it is important to recognise this. Steyning Parish Council does achieve good things. It does. It really does. Their policies, their procedures, they have a lot in place, and they have a lot of the right things in place. It's the enforcing of that's the problem, and it's being able to enforce it robustly when you've got so many, you've got difficult personalities that make that enforcing so much more harder and so much more difficult. So it is something that's open to us. It would be incredibly disappointing if that is something that we would have to look to, but it is available to us. And if I was here and going to be here in a year's time, I would definitely be holding that on my sleeve, because we want to see improvements. We don't have £65,000 to be spending. Resource like that. My own resource for many years. I started off dealing with standards complaints when I came here solely on my own. Because of, and it is true, I will make this statement publicly, because of Steyning Parish Council, I have a standards team. I have 2 deputy monitoring officers, because I've been unable to do and get through the complaints and deal with that, the amount of work that has come from them. And so it's those type of considerations that will be taken into account with regard to a governance, review. What are we spending? We're talking about, we've been criticised for spending £20,000 is what's being put out there in the public domain. We've spent as we've clarified, we've spent just over £13,000. Hopefully, I'd like to say money well spent. But it's a reality. It takes time. We are hoping going forward, as the chair has already said, we put complaints on abeyance. We didn't accept any complaints during this review process. And we are hoping, seriously hoping, that going forward, the complaints that come in will be true complaints. We gave reassurances sitting in front of Steyning Parish Council in their meeting. I gave reassurances that this council would look at those complaints going forward once the implementation plan was in place. And I've given those assurances, and we will look at and assess complaints going forward, and we will deal with them robustly, and we will deal with them quickly and efficiently. But if they continue to come in the frequency that they were coming in before, clearly something isn't working, and so we will be looking to this report. We will be working out what has gone wrong, and we will be dealing with that matter going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, does anyone else? Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank
Bill
you.
Baxter, Parish Representative
Parish Representative.
and
Thank
Shipley Parish Council. I'd like to pick up, if I may, on something that John Donaldson said. I think he implied, at least, that the civility and respect pledge should be adopted by all parish councils. My own council considered it against the existing and new code of practice, decided that that was perfectly adequate, and decided not to implement the civility and respect pledge. And let me just say this too. We have been talking in particular about one parish council that is, compared to all the others, shall we say, problematic, for want of a better word. And I don't think that every parish council should be treated in the same way because of that. So I would argue that we should not impose the pledge on councils, but still leave them to make their own decisions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think that I don't think there's any question of that being imposed on parish councils, but it's something that's voluntary, and it's encouraging that Steyning Parish Council have adopted it. Does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make? Okay, well, thank you very much for all your comments, and I think my feeling is from what has been said at this committee is that we do feel that this is a well considered and good report with some very positive constructive recommendations. I think we're perhaps not all quite in agreement as to the outcome, as to what that might be. Some of us perhaps have more faith than others, but it is a way forward for Steyning Parish Council. I know it's going to, as I've said, it's going to be hard, but I think every single councillor needs to show leadership, show by example, and not follow, as Councillor Skipper said, necessarily national examples. That's an example of what can happen when these qualities are not adhered to, of respect and tolerance and maturity in dealing with people not always of the same view as you. I do, as has been said by the monitoring officer, I do think we will need to monitor this very closely and offer our support and be firm in seeing it carried out, which is this is the resolution of Steyning Parish Council, that we will put into effect these resolutions. And we do of course have a district and parish council elections coming up in May 2023. So we will see what comes out of that. And we do very much would hope not to have to go down the community governance review step, but that is a possible sanction to bear in mind. So I'm going to leave that item now and move on to, we're simply asked to consider the report, so we don't have to vote on anything. So we now come to agenda item 7, which is the standards update, and that's to receive a verbal update from the monitoring officer, including feedback from the recent training. We had a training session, I think it was on Monday, wasn't it? So we'll have a word about that under this item. Thank you. So I'll hand over to the monitoring officer to update us on where we are with standards.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to delegate this matter over to one of my deputies. So over to Robert Baxendale. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As detailed in the minutes of the previous Standards Committee back on 15th of June, and to provide some comparative data and context, from April 2021 through to March 2022, there was a total of 34 standard code of conduct complaints. Out of those cases, 26 of those related to Steyning Parish Council. This financial year so far, and we're 2/3 of the way through, 8 months. So from April 2022 through to November 22, and this was up to last week, there had been a total of 9 code of conduct complaints. 4 of those related to HDC district councillors, 3 related to Steyning Parish councillors, and they were in effect dealt with within the HOE process. One related to Nuthurst Parish Council and one related to Paulborough Parish Council. So you can see the numbers are significantly lower in this year so far. Out of these 9 complaints, there were no further action or no breach found in 5 of those cases, and that was following a full assessment and consultation with the relevant independent persons. As stated, the 3 Steyning Parish Council ones were in effect dealt with within the HOE process. There was one case, and again, after assessment, following consultation with the independent person, the case was dealt with by an informal resolution, and that was dealt with satisfactorily for all parties. So that was the current position literally up until last week. I do have to report we've now received a further 4 code of conduct cases in the last week, including 3 that were received yesterday. All of these cases relate to Steyning Parish Council. So far, it will bring the total up to 13. And of course, we now have 4 outstanding cases, which we've not really had a chance to look at. As I say, 3 of them were received just yesterday. Training, we had a training session on Monday. And again, that follows the previous standards committee back on 15th of June, where we resolved to provide training for everybody. Howie Anscoff provided that. There were up to 86, 87 people that attended at one point. As I understand it, it was very well received. There was good initial feedback left in the chat. Lots of comments that it was very useful, especially the scenarios and working through them, etc. Obviously, we've not had an opportunity to gain full feedback yet. I'd be interested for those that did attend for their comments. What we do have is a recording of the training that we can pass out to people that couldn't make it. As I understand that there was probably less than half the district councillors that actually attended. But yeah, in effect, the training went well and was well received. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, the training session on Monday was by Howie Anscoff. I thought it was a good training session. It was all on Zoom, and we invited all the parish councils in Horsham District, 35, and neighbourhood councils were invited to attend, hence there was a very good turnout of 86 people all on Zoom listening in to the training. I thought it was a bit disappointing that there were only under half Horsham District councillors there, particularly as it was on Zoom, so easily accessible. And I was just going to also mention that, of course, this training is made a lot easier now, because I think pretty much all our parish councils have all adopted, we've all got the same code of conduct, which was the one that was drafted by the Local Government Association, and that we adopted at a council meeting last year. And then it was subsequently adopted, I think, by pretty much, but not quite, maybe all our parish councils. Yeah.
Pretty much all of them might have one outstanding.
Yeah. So we're all working from the same hymn sheet, and it makes training much easier. And of course, our job is dealing with breaches much easier as well. So does anyone have any comments on any of that? It's good to see the number of complaints down. Yeah, Councillor Skip.
Yeah, just to say I enjoyed it. I was a little sceptical about how I was going to find it, but I was riveted, particularly by the examples. I thought they were very good, and I learned several things that I didn't realise before. So it was good value, and for those of us who could make it, I think it was great.
Thank you. Councillor Burgess.
I agree. I thought it was specifically tailored for Horsham District Council. I'm sure it wasn't, but when you looked at some of the examples there, drunken chairman and all that sort of stuff.
And I think, Chair, it may be a good example in when the interview panel are interviewing Sharon's replacement, that a scenario based on local events may be part of the procedure.
Perhaps that might be a little off-putting for them, I don't know. Good. Yes, Belinda.
Councillor Belinda Waters.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question really about the 4 last complaints which have been received. Bearing in mind they've adopted the code of conduct. So I just wanted to make sure that they have actually gone through their own internal complaints procedure, and that's been fulfilled before the complaints have been accepted by Horsham District Council.
To be honest, we've not had an opportunity to look at the complaints yet. I say 3 of them only received literally late last night. So have not got much detail with regard to the complaints, but obviously we will look at all of that when we're considering them, and also how we're going to deal with them.
Yes, they've only recently come in, so they haven't gone through their preliminary assessment yet to decide how to take them forward. But thank you for your question. Any other comments on that? Okay, thank you. We now come to the last item on the agenda, which is urgent business. And I don't have any urgent business. So I'm going to, therefore, unless anyone has anything else. Just a little voice in my ear has said that I perhaps ought to let you know that the interim monitoring officer is going to be Lauren. So thank you. We look forward to meeting with you at our next meeting, which I think is it's in March. Our next meeting is 15th of March 2023. So I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I declare the meeting closed at 11:28. Thank you.